Welcome to another edition of the Black and White broadcast. So, in today's episode, we're going to be spotlighting two films, Spookies and Beyond Evil. Now, these I've just got on Blu-ray from Vinegar Syndrome, which is an American label, similar to Shout Factory. Of course, here in the UK, you could compare them to something like Arrow Video. You know, these are labels that give releases, new special edition releases, new collector's edition releases to more like cult films, you know. And I've got to say, this is my first time ordering from Vinegar Syndrome, and I am really pleased with both Beyond Evil and Spookies. They arrived in no time at all, considering they were coming from America. You always wonder how long you might have to wait when you order internationally, but these arrived in no time at all, and both of them absolutely brilliant. Of course, the gorgeous artwork on each of them is fantastic, and there's some really cool special features on each of them. And one other welcome addition, even though Vinegar Syndrome is an American label, both of these are region free, which is an absolute blessing, because of course can be one of the most infuriating things, you know, when there's a particular title you're looking for and you finally find, oh, it's got a Blu-ray release, and unfortunately it's in America and it's region A. You know, it's locked to that American, North American and Canadian region code, so unless you've got a multi-region player, you're snookered. I mean, it was a similar situation to Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. It finally got a Blu-ray release from Shout Factory, but obviously being an American label, an American release, it was locked to region A. Luckily though, I had a region A Blu-ray player, so was able to get around it. Similar situation to something like Cannibal Apocalypse or Apocalypse Domani, which is another film that John Saxon did around the time he did Beyond Evil. Both of them are from 1980. But I managed to find a Blu-ray release for Cannibal Apocalypse. You know, new restoration, new special features, really nice. Hell of it is. To region A, you know, I mean, but obviously if I wanted to get it, it's fine because I've got the multi-region player, but it's always nice when you can have a region free disc, and I'm happy to say that both Beyond Evil and Spookies from Vinegar Syndrome are multi-region, so you don't have to worry on that front. So if we were to delve right in, we'll start off with Beyond Evil. Now, Beyond Evil's a film that I'd seen a few years ago, because I do own it on DVD. I've owned it on DVD for quite a while. Obviously I am a big John Saxon guy, so obviously when I've been just trying to get my hands on any John Saxon films I could get, this was obviously one that I was happy to come across and add to the collection, because obviously this film has John Saxon front and centre. He's the lead. Obviously it's the thing about his career being a character actor, you know, oftentimes he wasn't necessarily the lead, you know, sometimes they were quite minimal, and sometimes pretty thankless roles that anyone could have played, really. But obviously this one, Beyond Evil, he's front and centre. But the DVD I got years ago, you know, the picture and sound's fine, you know, but it was a bare bones release. There was nothing in the way of special features, so it was one of the cool things. I was so pleased to find a Blu-ray release from Vinegar Syndrome. Obviously they've done this gorgeous artwork, and obviously they've done a couple of cool, you know, they've recorded a couple of new interviews with some of the people involved. Obviously Herb Fried, who was the director, and also the producer of the film, So these were newly recorded interviews, recorded specially for this release. So it was nice to actually have some accompanying bonus features to go along with the film itself. As for the presentation of the film, it's it's a new 2K restoration from basically the original vault elements. So basically the 35mm print of the film that they've basically taken, and they've give it the works new restoration. They've really sharpened it up in places. It's basically the best it's looked. So on that front, it's worth seeking this Blu-ray out, because it's the best. It's basically the best presentation of this film that we've got. The plot itself, it's essentially it's got elements of witchcraft and possession. Basically, John Saxon and his wife in the film, played by Linda Day George, they go out to the Philippines. Basically, John Saxon, he's an engineer. He's involved in construction, and there's basically this job he's hired to oversee, and it's based out in the Philippines. So obviously he goes out there for the job, and his wife goes with him because they're going to be out there for some time, and they get set up at this. They get set up with this mansion, and they're like, how the hell did you set us up with this? This must be, how did you afford this? Because obviously the company's paying for everything for them. And then they said, well, there's just this little catch that the place is supposed to be haunted. There was a witch that used to live here who was basically murdered by her husband, and then she later rose from the grave apparently and wreaked revenge, and she's put a curse on the place. Anyone who dares to live there, they're going to meet a bad end. But don't worry about it. Look at the amazing price you're getting this for. It's an absolute steal. For the sake of a couple of ghosts. So obviously they just roll with it, and obviously John Saxon's character in this has a healthy amount of skepticism going into this. So he's like, there's a lot of mumbo jumbo, a lot of superstition going around this island, so I'll believe it when I see it. As it happens, though, it doesn't take too long for weird things to start happening around the house, and basically what ultimately happens is Saxon's wife, Linda Day George, ultimately she becomes the target of the paranormal activity within the house. And basically what happens is the witch, Alma Martine is the name of the character, the witch, she basically ends up possessing Linda Day George's character. And then John Saxon has to put his skepticism aside and seek help from the local witch doctor of all people. Again, this film, it's ridiculous. It is. And again, it has no illusions. It knows exactly what it is. It's it's C-grade stuff. It has a very made-for-TV quality about. Obviously this was direct-to-video. But again, it's fine. It's trash, but it's enjoyable trash. And this is the thing with John Saxon, as I always say, while the material that he's chosen or had to work with throughout his career may not have always been good, forget about great, just not good, he's always been reliable. He's always been a consistently solid performer, and it's the same here. The material's not great, but he's reliable as always. And as I said at the top of this, he's front and center. We have him throughout the whole thing, so he basically is the shining point of this whole film. He carries it basically, and that's fine. This is, again, both of these films are quick sits. Beyond Evil clocks in at 95 minutes. So it's not overlong by any means. And obviously it's a very, very nuts and bolts, straightforward, formulaic type thing. Obviously things, it starts off small, and then the strange, this occasional strange things here and there, and then obviously things build and build, and then ultimately, or full on possession. We have to get out. We have to find a way to exercise the spirit. But there are parts where you can see it's influenced by various things. Like, there are elements of The Exorcist in there. There are elements of a lot of the Hammer films. But again, there's nothing pretentious about it. It knows exactly what it is. You know, but it's fun. It's fun. If you're just looking for something schlocky, something you can basically just turn your brain off and have fun with. Even if you just want to watch it and riff along with the movie. This isn't the kind of film that's designed to be taken seriously by any means. But it's just, again, I just love seeing John Saxon in anything. So obviously, that's what I take away from this film. If you haven't seen it, it's nothing great, but it's a fun way to kill 95 minutes. But no, it's, a real good nuts and bolts with plenty of John Saxon. Also, obviously, this came out in 1980, but it's in that period of time where we're in the hangover from the 70s. So there's lots of awesome 70s fashion going on. You get to see John Saxon rocking some sweet safari suits. There are flares for miles. Honestly, the costumes are fantastic in this movie. Yeah. So that's Beyond Evil. Um, Turn your brain off for 95 minutes and have fun with it. A total schlockfest, and with some outrageous special effects. When we get to the climax of the movie and we've got the witch flying around the place shooting lasers from her eyes. It's amazing. And of course, the two interviews that were recorded specifically for this release, they're interesting. They are, but again, it's not for everyone. Obviously, it might be fair to say it's for John Saxon completists specifically, but I had fun with it. And that brings us on to Spookies. Now, Spookies is something else entirely. Obviously, Beyond Evil's a schlockfest. Spookies is just absolute insanity. 1986 Spookies came out. Now, I had heard about this film a while ago thanks to Josh Hadley and the good folks over at Radiodrome. They spotlighted Spookies on one of their episodes, and he did some interviews with the people involved, because basically the production on this film was an absolute nightmare. Again, the abridged version. This film started out under the title of Twisted Souls. And what happened was you had your original team and your original cast of characters, and they got together and they filmed for a good month or so. And basically they came away with about, they had obviously, they'd shot a lot of footage, but in terms of actual stuff that would make it into the final cut of the film, they had 42 minutes of footage. Then what happened, there was basically shenanigans, executive interference. Michael Lee was the guy who was the top guy, like the top executive on this film, and he basically pulled the rug out from under the original team, and basically when the original team came in, they shot what they wanted to shoot, and then obviously it got to the post-production process where Michael Lee more and more started sticking his fingers in where they didn't belong. and obviously emotions were running high, tempers were flaring, things were really escalating, and it basically ended up with the original directors. There were two guys who directed originally, Thomas Duran and Brendan Faulkner. They were directed what was under the original title of Twisted Souls, and obviously what ended up happening is 42 minutes of footage that they shot was taken by Michael Lee, and then they brought in an individual called Eugenie Joseph. Now she'd had some success in the adult film industry, and then she decided she wanted to broaden her horizons and branch out. And she was basically brought in by Michael Lee to take over the project. And then the Twisted Souls title was cast aside, and they came up with a new title of Spookies. Again, not necessarily the best title, but here we are. And then she went back and shot all of 43 minutes of new footage, and then with that 43 minutes as opposed to Thomas Duran and Brendan Faulkner's measly 42 minutes, that gave her top billing. So you'll notice, if you would watch this film and you watch the opening credits, when it brings the three names up, directed by, Eugenie Joseph gets top billing. It's Eugenie Joseph, and then Thomas Duran and Brendan Faulkner are under her. She beat him out by a minute, imagine that. So basically what happened was, she shot basically a bunch of unrelated footage, and it was basically bolted together with the 42 minutes of footage from Duran and Faulkner, with varying degrees of success. Basically, you'll notice there's a tremendous, if you look, there's a tremendous disconnect between the stuff that's going on, because there's this weird stuff that goes on that involves, for lack of a better term, this sorcerer and his undead bride, and this figure that's like a cat creature. That was all shot by Eugenie Joseph after the fact. And then all the stuff that involves our main group of characters and all of the real cool monsters and creatures that they encounter, that's all takes place over here. So there's a tremendous disconnect. It is a Franken. Basically this is like Justice League levels almost. But even worse, because obviously when Eugenie Joseph got involved and was shooting new stuff, none of the original cast and crew returned, so it was a total new cast and crew that came in to film this new 43 minutes of footage that was just, bolted together in just try to make it make sense, and again, as we say, with varying degrees of success. I can't recommend that episode of Radiodrome highly enough, the Spookies retrospective. It's fascinating, and that leads me on to the next point. This release of Spookies by Vinegar Syndrome, obviously it's the best release that this film has ever had, because it's a difficult film. It's been a difficult film to get a hold of. It's basically been bootleg videotapes and DVDs to get this pristine release from Vinegar Syndrome on beautiful Blu-ray. And the special features on here are fantastic. There's a whole bonus disc which delves into the full making of what went down during the production, and then there's also an interesting documentary on Vipco, which was Michael Lee's video distribution company, the history of Vipco. So you've basically got the two like sides of the argument. Obviously you've got like the one featurette that's has the cast and crew of Spookies, venting the frustrations and the disappointment, with what went down during the production of the film, and then obviously you've got the other side of the of like the Michael Lee side of things. So it's fascinating. So the special features, in addition to the film itself, the special features are a real selling point on this one. We got to talk about the presentation of this film, because obviously we talked about with Beyond Evil the 2K restoration from the 35mm vault elements. You know, they took an existing print and touched it up. Whereas what you've got here with Spookies is something else entirely. What this is a full 4K restoration, and this is the key. It's always interesting when you hear about them doing remasterings and restorations of various films. Now, the word in here is key. A new 4K remaster from its 35mm original camera negative. Now, this is the key thing, because I remember learning this from listening to Robert Meyer Burnett talk about this, because obviously he worked at Warner Brothers for a period of time, and he was in charge of their physical media and physical distribution, and obviously, you know, the various DVD releases. So he was really involved with remastering and restoring, and he loves physical media. So he's someone I identify with, because physical media is fantastic. You can't beat actually owning a movie on disc. But he's an expert on all of the different, 4K restorations and digitally remastering. He knows that stuff like the back of his hand, and I always remember him saying, for a film to be given a true restoration, a true 4K restoration, the key is they need access to the original camera negative. And this is the key thing here, because they didn't have the original camera negative for Beyond Evil, so they had a print. Now, they did a fine job of remastering Beyond Evil. It looks good, but Spookies is an entirely different entity. Spookies looks absolutely pristine, because they've had access to the original camera negative, and they've done a true 4K restoration. It looks absolutely gorgeous. Whereas with Beyond Evil, you can see that it's an existing print that's just been given a work over, whereas Spookies is the real deal. It's absolutely gorgeous. But the thing, obviously, we've talked about with Beyond Evil, it's a schlocky, formulaic. It's not reinventing the wheel. The thing with Spookies is, obviously, it's not about the acting, because our group of shall we say, unwilling participants, our poor, misguided souls who are just lambs to the slaughter. They're not like, they're not tremendous thespians. It's not about they're basically caricatures. Really outlandish. This film is just all about outlandishness and over the top. It's again another film that's not designed to be taken seriously. So a lot of the characters in this are like cartoonish individuals, but it's not a film you watch for great acting or a great story. Obviously, that goes back to the idea that we've got footage that was shot over here bolted together with footage that was shot over here in a way that kind of makes sense, but not really. So there's no real story being communicated here or being told here. But what this film is, again, it's something that you'd get drunk with your friends to watch and enjoy. But the real shining point, its USP, its unique selling point, is the practical effects of this, because it's largely a creature feature, and it's like, okay, let's see the various monsters that our lambs to the slaughter are going to encounter along the way. Honestly, I gotta tell you right now, you talk about films with fantastic practical effects, stuff like Alien, John Carpenter's The Thing, The Terminator, obviously the original Star Wars trilogy, things like that. This is another, the American Werewolf in London, that fantastic werewolf transformation sequence. All films like that, I really think Spookies deserves to be part of the conversation when it comes to fantastic practical effects. Obviously, the Evil Dead trilogy is another one, but it goes back to that whole thing of people who just love the craft and love the work and are passionate. It's people who were just reveling in and relishing the opportunity to create. There's some gorgeous things in here. I don't know where to start. The honestly, the practical effects in this, the visual effects are tremendous. So one of the standout set pieces is when our character encounters this mysterious Korean woman, beautiful, and she lures him into this dark, through this dark corridor into this chamber, but it's not going to end well. And basically, she transforms into she's basically, we'll call it the Spider Woman sequence. It's horrifying, totally over the top, but the transformation sequence, again, we get to those American Werewolf in London levels of effects. It's phenomenal. It's really one of the highlight set pieces, and it's horrifying. But it's a tremendous sequence. Yeah, but again, it's one of those where it's just the horror of it all. It's very unsettling, unnerving, and it's supposed to be. But it's one of those, because this movie has a tremendous sense of humor about itself as well. It's very goofy. It's not pretentious by any means, but again, it's all about the creature effects and the monster effects. So the Spider Woman sequence is a real standout, and the various other creatures that, because again, it's a tale. It's a film of two parts. You have all the stuff over here that was done by the original team, which is absolutely first class, and then obviously. One of the things, because obviously, the basic premise is you have these group of partygoers that stumble upon this. They assume it's an abandoned mansion and said, "Why don't we stay here for the night?" And they discover this Ouija board. They come across this Ouija board in the mansion, and basically, they start contacting various spirits, and then things escalate from there. And they have to try and survive the night with all these various entities and monsters and ghouls coming out of nowhere and having at them. And then you've got all this weird stuff over here as well that's been just shot by Eugenie Joseph with this sorcerer and his undead bride and this cat creature thing. And again, it's just, they try to frame it as though the sorcerer's manipulating all the events that are going on. It's ridiculous. But another thing as well, if you watch this film, you'll notice that the sorcerer and this cat creature and the undead bride, they're supposed to be in the same vicinity as our main cast of characters, but at no point did they actually interact, and there's a good reason for that. It's because all the stuff with the sorcerer, his undead bride, and the cat creature was shot months after the fact. So it becomes painfully obvious, especially if you go into the film knowing about the troubled production. So you've got all this fantastic creature feature stuff going on with what the original guys did, and then basically as the film progresses, it gets to the point where we run out of footage that was shot with the original guys. So then we get into all just Eugenie Joseph footage, and the ending of this film makes no goddamn sense. And also, it's the actual makeup. Basically, zombies end up taking over the finale. We get away from the various other entities and ghosts and ghouls that we've encountered. And just go, oh no, just zombies. Okay, we don't know why, but zombies. We've obviously around the mansion there's all these tombstones, so they're going to come into play at some point. So zombies. And they're basically chasing the undead bride. She doesn't want to be controlled by the sorcerer anymore, so she makes a run for it, and then all these zombies are summoned to basically hunt her down. The actual makeup and practical effect on the zombies is pretty good, but as has been pointed out, these are supposed to be zombies that have been dead for hundreds of years. No effort was made to outfit them appropriately because there's so much flannel and so much denim. Basically, it's a hillbilly graveyard. So, effort was done certainly on the makeup, but that's as far as the effort went. When it came to actual costuming, it's like, no, just come to work, come to the set in your own clothes. They'll have to do. So it's like, well, what are you gonna do? But again, and it just gets to the point, this film even doesn't have a real ending. It just stops. There's like there's like a final stinger of the sorcerer rising up out of this grave, and the film just cuts to black, and you're like, what? And that's okay though, because guess what? When the original team who worked on Spookies until they were unceremoniously kicked to the curb went to see it in the theatre after when it was released, they had the exact same reaction, like, what the hell is this? So yeah, Spookies is a film that makes no goddamn sense, but it's alright though, because when you look into the troubled production, it makes sense that it makes no sense. What I will sign off with, the last thing I will say about the film, obviously it's schlocky, it's fun. Again, this is another quick sit. Obviously, Beyond Evil was 95 minutes. You've probably worked it out. 42 minutes plus 43 gives us a grand total of 85 minutes. It's in, out, put the kettle on, son. So basically what I'm saying is, when next Halloween rolls around, if you're looking for something to get some takeaway in and get some friends over, if that's allowed to happen, because you never know, and you just want to get basically drunk to the point where it doesn't even matter if there's a coherent story anymore, this is the film for you, baby. I mean, you could go, there's so many things you could pick from. You can always do Ye Old Faithful Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, but you could also do Spookies. So again, the story makes no sense. The acting's terrible. There are some gorgeous women in this though, so that's always a bonus. But what I will say is the crowning jewel of this whole thing. It's got a cool soundtrack. The music score's good. The coolest thing I got to tell you right now. Obviously, we've talked about some of the awesome creatures and visual and practical effects that were created for this film. The shining star of this whole thing is this beautiful Grim Reaper that was created for this thing. Oh, you guys don't even know. This basically, there's a whole set piece where as the ante's been upped, and we're down to our last few characters that have managed to survive being picked off. They're sending the big guns, and they actually send in the Grim Reaper, scythe and all, and we have this scene where he's chasing him out onto the roof of the house, and honestly, it's the coolest thing you've ever seen. I mean, obviously, because the design on this thing, and it's like 7 foot tall, and he's got this glowing red eyes, and obviously he's got his scythe, and he's just swinging for the fences, and it's so cool. I mean, there's certain I've always been, you know, as I've watched certain horror films, there's been certain character designs that have always stuck with me, like the 1970 Japanese film The Vampire Doll. Yuko, who is the main vampire in that film, the character design for her is absolutely gorgeous. It's fantastic, you know, with the pale skin, the white gown, the long black hair, and the golden eyes, which was a really cool trope in that movie. And another Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, going back to that, the design of each of the seven golden vampires was fantastic. Some much more recently, something like Escape from Vampire Island, Miyabi, who is the arch vampire of that film, absolutely gorgeous. You know, and something more recent again, Insidious. I love the character design of the bride in black in that movie. These really awesome character designs that stick with you. It's always nice when you can find, you know, something in a horror film that really captures your attention, you know, and even, you know, years might go by, but you always have that particular image that sticks in your mind. That's very important, and I really feel that the Grim Reaper from Spookies reaches that level. It's so cool, man. You don't even know, and it's used really effectively. But yeah, the Grim Reaper for me was the crowning achievement of this film. That's my biggest takeaway. Spookies, yeah, it's the one with the awesome Grim Reaper. It's so cool. But again, that pretty much brings this to a close. You know, two schlocky movies, but they're certainly entertaining. Each film, though, they've both been given a wonderful presentation, and they've been given a beautiful release from Vinegar Syndrome. Basically, the best release of each of these that you could ask for, you know. So, if you haven't seen them and you're intrigued to see them, be sure to get the video, the Vinegar Syndrome release for each of these, because especially Spookies, because the restoration job done on this is second to none, and the fantastic featurettes on the making of Spookies is just fascinating. So if I was to pick, they're both great in terms, but if I was, because this is one of the downsides, you know, they're pretty pricey. I don't think that's unfair to say, and especially when you factor in the international shipping. So it might be, say you could only get one, you know, that was the only, you know, you could only stretch so far as to be able to buy one. Out of the two, I'd say go with Spookies. As much as I like Beyond Evil, and obviously I'm a big Saxon guy, but again, if I was being brutally honest, Beyond Evil really is a film for John Saxon completists, really, whereas Spookies has much more general appeal. And if you're just looking for total insanity and some really cool creatures and monsters, yeah, Spookies got it. But yeah, that pretty much brings this to a close. Thank you for listening to me ramble. And again, check out Vinegar Syndrome, because obviously they're an independent label, and obviously with that, it's one of those where it's all about the passion, because it's that same old thing. The independent labels are often going to do the better job because it's not a cash grab for them. They're doing it because they've got a legitimate passion for what they're doing. So places like Vinegar Syndrome, Shout Factory, Arrow Video, they all deserve to be supported, and often they do the best releases that you're going to get of a particular film, certainly with Spookies. But that brings this to a close, and also on the Spookies front, I'll post a link to the Radiodrome episodes that Josh Hadley did on Spookies, because it's fascinating. But yeah, that brings us to a close. Again, if you're a fan of the Vinegar Syndrome label, and if you've purchased from them before, if you've purchased either Spookies or Beyond Evil, please feel free to sound off in the comments below. I'd love to get your thoughts. And if you've enjoyed it, please again feel free to comment below. But thanks for listening to me ramble and spew this word salad. Hopefully it's made more sense than the plot of Spookies does. But that brings us to a close. I really appreciate you indulging me, and I wish you all the best. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.